I hate to say this, but is Hezbollah Chief Hassan Nasrallah right in this case? Did this new mandate really do anything?
I have to admit that the new mandate contains the words additional inspections and patrols, and then it would be up to UNIFIL to use those words in the new resolution for 1701, that they could be more robust in their actions. But as we know, UNIFIL has been rather mild. It has not really done the kind of inspections and patrols to prevent Hezbollah from moving equipment and missiles, particularly below the Litani River.
Mary, do you think that the United States and Israel are right that UNIFIL have failed to do their job up until now, and does this change anything?
I think that the whole idea after 2006 and the updated mandate was to give UNIFIL teeth, and they gave them, and they haven't used them. I think that they continue to be a peacekeeping force and not a peace enforcing. And the fact that they don't enforce the peace has a lot to do also with the Lebanese army, another piece in the puzzle. They're supposed to be working hand in hand with them, and even that they barely do.
When you're facing, though, a group like Hezbollah with around 150,000 rockets, with robust forces that is itself a big part, a political part of Lebanon, can you keep the peace? Can a UN force enforce peace?
Let's talk for a moment about numbers. At the end, we always say that Hezbollah at the most has 10,000 fighters. The United Nations has a larger force at this moment in Lebanon. It's over 11,000 people. So in numbers, they're actually more. The United Nations is only in southern Lebanon. They're not supposed to go out and confront Hezbollah, but they can very much be effective in stopping them transfer weapons, storing the weapons, keeping those anywhere in southern Lebanon.
Howard, we've heard the United States, and particular Ambassador Nikki Haley, being very vocal both about Hezbollah and Iran in her 7-month tenure. Do you think that the United States would be prepared to do more, and if so, what, in terms of Iran and Hezbollah in Lebanon?
Well, the situation with Iran is emerging now. Clearly, Iran is supplying lots of forces to Hezbollah, both in Lebanon and in Syria. And, of course, there are threats now that Iran is virtually taking over those parts of Syria run by Assad. And, of course, Iran is now also asserting itself in Iraq. So there's a huge band of Iranian control that's spreading north of Israel. And with respect to Lebanon, I think an enhanced UNIFIL has to be willing. It's not just having the authority, but it has to be willing to go in and at least report on those weapons that are being brought in across the river and placed in homes and schools and hospitals. That's the key.
Howard, the lack of clarity that we've seen from the Trump administration on policy in the Middle East and policy on Syria, can that be used, can that be leveraged by groups like this, like Hezbollah, that are very actively carving out their future in this region?
Yes, I agree. And to answer your previous question, it's absolutely true. I don't think that this administration, the Trump administration, has a clear policy on Lebanon, has a clear policy on Israel to support it completely and to do whatever is necessary for its defense. But it is not taking strong enough measures with respect to Hezbollah, with respect to Iran, with respect to the situation in Syria. And unfortunately, you know, I don't see the leadership in the State Department, where we used to have many good, experienced diplomats that have now been forced out, and the same is true for the National Security Council. So as of now, I don't see a policy that would be giving Hezbollah any reason for pause in moving more weapons from Iran into southern Lebanon.
And Mary, in this case, it is as complex as almost every corner right now in the Middle East, because we hear President Trump, the United States, coming out saying we are fighting ISIS, that's our priority. In this case, Hezbollah is also fighting ISIS, but also considered a terror group by the United States.
And it's also fighting together with the Lebanese army against ISIS, and it was a joint attack, and they managed to do so together. When we talk about enemies and rebels and who's with us in the United States, we all need to be clear. My enemy is not always somebody who afterwards can be hand in hand together with us. We need to be very careful. Hezbollah is not just in Lebanon right now. This isn't just about UNIFIL in Lebanon. Hezbollah is on the Golan Heights on the other side in Syria. It's fighting against Islamic State. Oh my God, so is everybody else. Israel right now in that sense, is the only one who isn't directly fighting against the Islamic State. Is that leaving us out of what's going on right now? We're so focused right now on Iran, on Hezbollah, because we can see how they're taking advantage of the situation, both in Lebanon and in Syria, and by the way, in additional places. And this is not good news, not just for Israel, for all of the moderate countries in the Middle East.
What you mentioned, that this is about the future, this is about after IS, that is what we've heard from Netanyahu. And when we see Israeli officials going from Washington to Sochi to ring alarm bells on that, do you think that might be laying the groundwork for a future Israeli strike that might be a little bit more significant than we've seen before?
I think that Syria has a lot of Russian troops, and it brings us back to the 1970s in a sense, where suddenly, yes, we have diplomatic ties with Russia. The Prime Minister can go and talk to the President of Russia, but do we really want to attack when there are Russian troops on the ground? They've already placed troops on the ground on the Golan Heights, in addition to both surface-air missiles that are with Russian soldiers. This isn't something that's together with Hezbollah or with the Syrians. These are very big changes for Israel in the arena. When I look at Russia right now, I think that the main focus is that Russia is a very major player. They're the only ones who can probably impact Iran and Hezbollah in Syria, but they're not in Lebanon.
Howard, briefly, do you think that Russia is a positive ally for the United States in Syria and Lebanon?
No, I do not. I think Russia is pursuing its own interests. We don't have a good relationship with Russia. We really need to start talking to the Russians about a combined activity that would measure Russian and American influence against forces like Iran and Hezbollah that are now taking over areas of Lebanon and Syria and, as I said, Iraq. Another element, of course, is for Israel to do what it needs to do in terms of working with the moderate regimes, the Sunni regimes that are strongly opposed to Iran. And I think that is going on now, and I think that would be another avenue quietly under the radar for Israel to continue to pursue.